Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about demystifying returnable packaging systems, both for F&B providers, but also for workplaces and office buildings. So this is stuff that I've been working on the last few years in Hong Kong, and going to share a little bit about sort of what returnable packaging systems are, first of all, and then some of the experiences that we've had over the last few years, especially during COVID, trying to launch shared cup systems. That should give some good insights and understanding as to how the systems kind of work. So just sort of introduce a little bit of background information on circularity. So we've been developing, testing various reuse and return systems over the last 3 years in Hong Kong. So far we've had over 14,000 tablewares that have been saved from landfill, from borrow and return. We're very proud of our 98.5% return rate. We have won several innovation awards for different technology bits that we've developed, and we currently have a few different setups. So we have our open network of coffee shops, which is 40 different coffee shops across Hong Kong where you can borrow and return a reusable or returnable coffee cup. We also then have some closed networks that are just sort of internal networks inside buildings. And then we've also recently started doing a lot more events now that events are happening again in Hong Kong. And some of those closed network and event ones are kind of client branded systems, which is what we're now starting to move in the direction of. So I kind of want to start first of all with just explaining why I started the company and why I feel it's so important that we switch from disposables to reusables, or what I usually refer to them now as returnables. So the picture on the left here is Silver Mine Bay Beach in Mui Wo on Lantau Island in Hong Kong. This was after one of the typhoons, and this is just a snapshot of the beach. The entire beach is probably about 400 or 500 meters long, and it was all like this. It was absolutely horrendous. And in about 3 days, it was completely clean again because all the cleaners came in, cleaned it all up as if it hadn't happened. And this is what I feel is quite often the problem in Hong Kong, is such an efficient city at cleaning stuff up that we don't actually see the mess that we've kind of created. And the picture on the right is my now 3-year-old child, and he had a very different experience growing up than I did. So when I grew up in Northern Ireland, our beaches are pretty pristine. I used to play with, in rock pools, shells, things like that. When he plays at the beach, he plays with bits of plastic. And I think that that's really sad that that's the environment he's growing up in, and he thinks it's normal, and that's completely wrong. So this is something that kind of, drives me to want to try and change the system. So this is the focus as to what we're doing in Circular City. We don't focus on downstream recycling. We focus on upstream solutions as to how do we not create waste in the first place. So coming back to that idea of the recycling bit. So I actually did a project a few years ago. So originally I was I was head of design at one of the international schools in Hong Kong, and we were working on a project called Precious Plastics. Some of you might be familiar with. So we built some machines that was able to shred up single-use takeout packaging. We then built an extrude it into beams, and then we put it on the lathe and the milling machine, and we turned it into what was actually really nice products. So you can see the lamp here actually nearly looks like marble or granite. So we made some really cool lamps and some bits of furniture. But as we were doing this, and the more I sort of was going through the project, I started to hear more and more students saying, oh, we went and got takeout this weekend so that we had containers to come in and shred up and turn into new products. And that's when it kind of hit me that what I was doing was actually just spurring more single use. So the idea with recycling, especially when it comes to food takeout, is if we have a recycling system that needs a source of input, which just encourages more single use, and it gives the excuse that we can just keep churning out all the single use plastics. So that's really when I completely changed my mindset and decided I didn't want to focus on this anymore, and that we wanted to focus on those upstream solutions, and that's kind of what the next slide is about. So I think most of you are probably familiar with this, the sort of zero waste hierarchy. Hong Kong at the minute is still very much focused on this bottom half. Hong Kong loves to recycle. It's got a massive recycling fund with tons of money. Just about every ESG billboard I see has something to do with recycling in it. But it's not a long-term solution. Tons of money has been poured into it, and it still doesn't work in Hong Kong. So we really do need to rethink the system, and that's where moving upstream comes in. So certainly not to say it's easy to do the upstream systems. That's what we've been working on the last few years, but it is the future that we need to move towards. And that's about rethinking the whole system and trying to move towards reuse and return systems rather than just relying on these downstream recycling systems. So just very quick introductions to the key components of what returnable packaging is. So an example that we've been working on the last few years is the coffee cup. So a nice durable coffee cup, where you can see in this example a nice durable salad bowl. So that's the kind of packaging bit of it. Okay, you need obviously some sort of reusable packaging that's going to last a long time. There's the tracking side of it, so actually being able to know where all these containers are and knowing your stock levels. There's the logistics side of it. So if you have an open network of lots of different coffee shops, you obviously need to rebalance those every so often. There's the sanitizing, which is the washing side of it. And then there's the packaging guarantee. This could be a deposit or some kind of guarantee that the person's going to bring it back again. So these tend to be the key components of a returnable sort of system for returnable food packaging. There's quite a lot of different models going that are sort of happening around the world. People are trying out lots of different experiments. Very quickly sort of run over these, but you're all familiar with BYO, bring your own. Great concept, but the vast majority of people forget their mugs. I've got about 20-something mugs at home or coffee cups at home, keep forgetting them. So great, but it's not the most convenient system. Then there's the trust-based system. So some workplaces have stuff that you can borrow, take out, but a lot of that tends to gradually disappear into people's homes. So great to have, but it's difficult again to make sure it sort of stays in the system. There's then the cash deposit system. This is quite common in Europe in a lot of the Christmas markets. Generally works pretty well, but it does have a bit of it's quite tricky to sort of track stock levels, especially when you need to replenish. And also balancing those deposits can get quite messy if there's lots of different outlets. There's then the digital deposit system. So this is something that we experimented with in our first sort of version. So this is where you could pay a deposit in cash and then you could refund it digitally. Or you can pay it in digital format and then refund it digitally as well. Again, something we learned is there is barriers when you put the word deposit. A lot of people kind of pull back a little bit. So that's something that it's in one way it's good to have, but a lot of people are sort of a bit hesitant towards it. And then there's the kind of the last option, which is the digital payment guarantee system. I can't actually read my slide because all the faces of people are covering it up. There we go. So this is where you usually it's app-based, and this is where somebody needs to basically provide a payment guarantee. So usually credit card details that if the person doesn't return it, you can charge the credit card. So that's a really good way of not having to do deposits, but it does create a little bit of a barrier in the fact that people have to add usually a credit card, or it could be the likes of Apple Pay, Google Pay. As that guarantee, so a little bit like the hotel kind of this system. So those are generally the kind of the systems that are in existence at the minute. All have pros and cons to them. There's definitely not one perfect one. They tend to work well in different environments. So for anyone that's not quite sure what way these generally work, this is a good example of our it's our current system, but our current system is in the process of being replaced. So let's say you were using that last one that I just talked about, of the credit card guarantee. So that usually requires a registration right at the beginning, where you need to put in your, some of your details. You need to add a credit card guarantee. Then usually you'll scan the container that you're borrowing, and that links the item or the container to your account. You've then got a set period of time to return it before you need to drop it back again. So you borrow the container, you enjoy it, you return it a few days later, and you can also earn things like loyalty points or reward points through that. And then the containers get taken off for washing, and again, the system just repeats itself. And one of the bonuses of the digital side of things is there's a lot of data capture that can go on, which is really good for things like ESG reporting. So just a little bit of an overview in terms of some of the benefits of returnable packaging systems for food and beverage outlets. So obviously a pretty obvious one is the waste reduction. It also really helps improve brand image. So if you're able to actually offer customers a new choice that is a much more sustainable option, and it's got your branding on it, then that's a bit of a win-win from both sides. In the long term, it can definitely generate a lot of cost savings. So this is more so for things like catering groups and outlets that are going to be doing a lot of turnover. They will definitely save money over time if those containers are used enough and containers constantly come back into circulation. In terms of user experience, there is still a little bit of a friction at the minute in terms of the borrowing bit and the initial sign up. But after that, we tend to find that people kind of get hooked on the system, which is really good. And they do enjoy drinking out of a nice coffee cup rather than a, I'll not say a bad word here, but a not so nice paper cup. And also, with the way some of the systems are going and the way our system is going is it does enable your brand to be able to actually have their kind of branding and not have to necessarily have a third party artwork on those cups. Obvious benefits for the environment, waste reduction, resource conservation. Generally speaking, it's a lower carbon footprint again, as long as those are used enough times. And this one I think is quite an important one. I think in the next few years, this is going to become a lot more prominent is, if you have single use with your branding on it and that's washing up on beaches and people start taking photographs of that, that's a really bad sign. So to not have that happen, these returnable systems put a bit more control in your hands to try and make sure that you actually get that back again. And the last bit is just environmental awareness building. The more these reuse and return systems are kind of active, the more people will learn about them. Because a lot of people, don't learn about this stuff in their daily work or even in schools, unfortunately. Main challenges around reuse and return systems that we've kind of come across: hygiene concerns. We launched our business during COVID. It was probably the most sort of silly time to launch a returnable shared cup system. But unfortunately, in the world of a startup, there's never a perfect time to launch, so we just did it anyway. And thankfully, we got traction and it's been growing kind of ever since. But hygiene is something, especially in Hong Kong, where people are very, very sensitive to sort of hygiene. It is still a barrier, and that's something that, being able to demonstrate to people the washing processes is really important. And something that we're now actually trying to sort of highlight is actually asking the person if they're a bit concerned about the reusables. It's saying to them, well, did you ever consider that your single use was never washed, or your food was put in it, or your hot drink was put in it? That came straight from a factory. And that might start to get them to think a little bit differently. Logistics, if it's an open network, logistics is a challenge. If it's more within a building, it's much simpler. And then a lot of food and beverage outlets, they automatically think because this is something more eco or sustainable that it's going to be more expensive. And that's not necessarily true. It is expensive if you don't get the cups back, and it is expensive if they don't get used enough. But if they do get used enough and you do recover them each time, then actually you will almost certainly save quite a lot of money in the long run. Just a few sort of challenges that still kind of come up. Network effects. It's difficult to get a reuse return system going, especially if it's an open network, because you obviously need quite a few different return points to start with. So that's where we partnered with Greenpeace to launch our open network, and that was helpful because they were able to get a lot of sort of different coffee shops on board at one go to start with. Partnerships, really important. Sort of nobody can kind of do everything in circular economy. You do need to form partnerships, but that also comes with challenges because everybody's got their own KPIs, and everybody wants to do things a little bit differently. And I know with ourselves and Greenpeace, they've been fantastic in supporting us. But the way that they do their marketing is very different to the way that I would do mine. So that sometimes we've had to have some kind of negotiations on what way we address it. And then the biggest challenge by far is mindset change and changing people's behavior. Again, in Hong Kong, a lot of it comes down to sort of raising awareness and educating people about this is a better system than the current one. Bonus of returnable packaging, there is a lot of opportunities. So if they've got itemized QR codes on it, you can actually really tap into that through sort of online to offline marketing. So that could be through gamification, that could be through rewards. We've already done some integration work with some loyalty programs. And some of the interesting things we've seen as well from looking at the data is that there's about a third of people, when they return a cup, they also then buy another coffee. So actually from a food and beverage perspective, they're getting some upsells when normally that person wouldn't be returning into the shop. So really just a few key takeaways from kind of what we've learned over the last few years is this idea of kind of packaging as a service. So kind of what we've been doing. It's definitely got long-term ROI benefits, but it is difficult for people to see that initially. A lot of these systems are still in their infancy, but that's a good thing because it means there's loads of experiments going on. Everybody's trying different things. And just like some of the previous presenters said, different regions and geographies and cultures, you do need to tweak things. The data insights are really helpful because you can see, a lot of insights. You've obviously got the data tracking, which, especially when we work with some corporates, is to be able to give them sort of some of that data for their ESG reporting is something they're particularly keen on. And any circular economy stuff requires a lot of different stakeholders to work together, and that's definitely one of the biggest challenges. But the good news is that these systems are actually a lot simpler than you think. So anyone that sort of is interested to, especially if you come from food and beverage, or if you just work in an office or a workplace and you want to try these reuse and return systems in your sort of environment, they're actually quite simple. What I probably just told you makes it sound complicated, but they can be put together quite easily and they can be quite simple to run. And just to sort of finish on, this isn't really sort of what we've moved in the direction of now, is that we've actually sort of matured into more of a lending platform, which actually enables brands. So, for example, a coffee brand, or it could actually be an office block or an office themselves, to actually run their own reuse and return programs or systems. It can be their branding, it can be their tablewares, and it's nearly a bit of like a white labeled kind of version. So it doesn't necessarily need us to be kind of running that. So if this is something that, and anyone that's sort of looking to do something like this, do feel free to reach out to us and we can chat you through it a little bit more. And at the minute, again, sort of what we're aiming in the direction of now is a little bit less on the open network and more focusing on office buildings that have coffee shops already in them, offices or campuses that might have catering, working with chain brands, and then also events and festivals. So I welcome any questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat, and do feel free to connect with me. If you scan the code, there's my LinkedIn somewhere in there. Do feel free to connect, and yeah,